Well, it's edge time, folks. And I'm reminiscing, let me see, 1980. I've talked about this in the past, and I looked at it. I look at where we are now and what the past has shown us and why we are where we are. We've heard a litany of conservative people or so called conservative people, mostly social conservatives. Let me define what a social conservative is over a true conservative that's fiscal or fiscal conservative. A social conservative is more concerned about moralities of other people and why other people are sinful. A lot of people who are religion based are judging everybody. They like to play God. And those who want to judge others, the Ten Commandments are good about that. Thou shalt not, or else man will punish you for God's purposes. Thou shalt not, or else. 10 Commandments. Then you have Islam with 24 commandments, almost 1.5 times the number. And the last one, 24th, is called Taqiyya under modern day Islam, which is Wahhabist, or anyway, it's what Saudi Arabia preaches to the billion people that follow Sunni Islam. And that's about judgment. And the lowest of the low in Saudi Arabia are women. But they're not that far away in terms of importance under Mosaic law or Jewish law, conservative Jewish law. Conservative Jews with the long hair down the sideburns and all of that, they're Hasidic Jews. They're not that much different than Muslim men. They see women as secondary, and not quite as much. No one can match the Sunni Muslims and their degradation of women. They're nothing more than meat and alternate slaves. They're to be hidden from being attractive to anyone else but the man who owns them. What's that all about? Well, it's about government and no government. And when did we get into the pathway of this situation? America. We came out of a depression in 1935 very slowly. In 1941 came a war, speeded up our escape from depression, everybody working, lots of debt by the government, military spending, the war, the war, the war. And we continue to spend, and those taxes on the rich at that time paid for that because nobody else had any damn money. So when people don't have money in the middle, the only people that have money are at the top. So the only place you can go for money to run a government, if you believe in government, having money to run on. Government's not there just to be the prostitute for rich people to get more wealth. That's not the purpose of government. The purpose of government is to provide protection for helpless people, old people, children, very young people, helpless people, people who lost their jobs through bad times. Those are all helpless people. And a government is about security. It says so in the Constitution, and the security of the people's welfare. It says that in the Constitution, which was written by rich people, for rich people. Because at the time they wrote the Constitution, the only people who could vote were people who had and owned land, landholders, rich people, and a few intellectuals. But all in all, we started out that way. And we didn't want to have a king again. We didn't want to do that. But over time, we worked our way through different presidents. And along comes Abraham Lincoln. And he sees progress as building things for people. He formed the big beginnings of the Republican Party. He split the Democrats and the Whigs at the time in the 1850s. And he did it on the basis of abolition of slavery, because it was a moral cause. The English banned slavery in I think it was 1850, and 1860 the Civil War started in the United States because we wanted to ban slavery. But the people in the South, the southern states, That was their income. That was their big wealth. Selling of slaves like prize cattle was big money in those days. $2,000 for a prize male, $2,000 for a prize female, human. Or are they human or are they not? According to some people, they're low lives. In any event, that's what happened. So in the space of 6 years, Abraham Lincoln said, government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's important. He set the tone for what government was. Not government's bad, government's purposeful. That's what government is. It's for you, of the people, of the, all people, not some people. Not of the few, by the few, for the few. That was Lincoln. And that didn't really change because a lot of people thought that was a good idea. The war was won with much bloodshed and the assassination of that president. In that process of 6 years, what did he do? He built the telegraph from east to west on the rail system. So people communicated by telegraph and telegram. Very modern for its time. Not and no, it opened up the West with rail, and now you have a way to bring your cattle out of the West into the East and sell the meat in Chicago and the meat slaughterhouses and things like that. So the country became welded together in a way. The economics were there. The emancipation was announced at that time. And then 2 years after the emancipation was announced, Juneteenth, 2 years later, is just celebrated with Biden, that you're honoring the final opening of an elimination of slavery through emancipation called Juneteenth. Now we're at a point we've got a government that both parties believe in, because FDR, the Democrat, took us out of the Depression with a tax on the wealthy. And that continued under Truman, who won a very close election against Dewey, a Republican, who would have kept the wealth tax in place the same way. And here comes Eisenhower, a Republican, and he keeps the wealth tax in place at 90% for his full 8 years. He said, you're not going to work for me unless you're for the New Deal. Tax the wealthy. That's what builds this country. That's where you spend money to make everybody work, you keep them going so they have dignity. You don't humiliate people by just throwing them on the side and blaming them for their own problems because they don't work hard enough or the jobs aren't there. So what? It's their fault. The corporations can cut and run under some conditions in later times, and to hell with the worker. To hell with the worker. And then in the 30s, the unions came into play, and they helped build the country after a lot of the country was built before on the backs of slaves. It's a more of an equality thing that you build the country that way. Of the people, by the people, for the people. The lowest and the highest, not just the highest. You build the government around that. And then comes along in 1980, after the electric grid has been built on the wealth tax. The interstate highway system was built on the wealth tax. The GI Bill was built on the wealth tax. The war was won on the wealth tax. The wealth tax, the wealth tax. They all followed it, from John Kennedy through to LBJ after Kennedy was assassinated, to Nixon, who replaced LBJ. He kept the wealth tax in place. A Republican kept the wealth tax in place because it kept the country functioning. It's how you pay for your government and make it work. And then comes Ford. He kept it in place. And that was in 1976 when he lost the election to Jimmy Carter, who kept the wealth tax in place. When Carter left office, it was a little less than $900 billion in total debt. And all these things had been built the electric grid. That's your electricity for the farms out in the countryside. All that was done in a 45-year period. So when Reagan got in there, or was going to get in there, I looked at what he had done to California as governor. And he had a famous statement he made: government's a problem, not the solution. Now, here we did all this good stuff. Hoover Dam, the TVA, World War II, that was government. Interstate highway system, that was government. So then he says, against all of that, government's a problem, not the solution. Maybe he was talking about himself, because prior to his becoming president, after he won the primary and won the election, I ran into a guy who was going to run against him, John Anderson. Excuse me, the election hadn't happened yet. It was before November 3rd. John Anderson was going to run on a tax on gasoline, 50 cents a gallon. Because if you tax the gasoline, the increase in the costs, that money stays in this country. The tax money is our money. If a country like Saudi Arabia raises the price of gasoline, that's a tax, but they keep the money. So who gets to the money first and makes the price of gasoline go higher? But the money stays in our country instead of going to Saudi Arabia. What would you do? Anyway, that's what John Anderson wanted to do. So I went to a table. I may have told this story in different ways before, in a mall up in Peoria, Illinois, on a Sunday afternoon. And this John Anderson was saying good things that I thought were pretty good. But then I didn't really know enough about him, but I wanted to say what I thought of Reagan, what a mistake Reagan was to be the candidate for the Republican Party. I was Republican at the time. I voted for George Bush Sr. And I thought he was far and away a better candidate than Reagan, because Reagan wrecked California as governor. He drove the school system into the hole, from number 2 in the country to number 18. He ruined the tax rate and the property taxes, and the way he jacked the property taxes around. He forced people. He changed originally, before he came into office, the tax was based on your sale of your property when you bought it. Then he changed it to your sale of your property in your area, meaning that the condos that go next door that go at one price, and your property goes at whatever price it was at the time you bought into it. So let's say you bought your house for, in those days, let's say $50,000, because that's California, and $50,000 was going to get you a pretty good house. However, when you change the law that way, let's say 2 years later they put some condos next door to you, those prices go at much higher. People who retired on the beaches of California bought their houses way back in the 1900s. They started paying taxes based on those condos going next door to them, from $5,000 to $200,000. Their taxes jumped, the rates jumped, and Reagan did that. And the same guy that says government's a problem, not the solution. And then his education system was screwed up. And so I said all these things. And the people at the table, John Anderson table, said, "Would you repeat what you said?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." Well, but why would I? It's just because the person to your left has got a camera on his shoulder. I'd like you to say it into the camera. Oh, okay. So I did that. It was on local TV. I forgot all about it that Sunday evening. It was on, I guess, 5 or 10 minutes. They were letting me run. And somebody downtown Peoria, Illinois, on a Monday morning yells across the street, "I thought you were Republican. You bashed Reagan, a great man." And I says, "Well, you got a funny idea of greatness. He doesn't believe in government. If you think that's great, then you've got a screwy idea. If you don't believe in government, of the people, by the people, then you're not an American. And you just want to see power shifted on who you like more than somebody else. If you think government's all about getting power for a person, not for the country, then you're not for the country. You may as well be a traitor to the country, because you don't care about anything but money for your friends and wealth." Now, people will say, "Well, Augie, you're naive. You don't think that's what goes on." Of course, there's abuses. Of course, there's production. Nothing's perfect. But you just wholesale give it over to one person and give away my freedoms. Let that person decide my freedoms, what I can say, what I can't say. Then I'm not uh, of the mind that you're a true American believer in freedom of speech or the Bill of Rights or any of that. And if you're not a believer in that, forget about America. It's gone. Who set this? Well, Reagan did. How did Reagan set this up? Well, anyway, in the speech, I said that Reagan would leave us in terrible debt. He inherited almost no debt, and he left $3 trillion because he cut the taxes to the wealthy from, I think it was 70% down to 21%. That's 50% cut in taxes that went right to the moneyed people. Didn't do a damn thing for the stock market enough to make it worth that, and sure as hell wrecked the economy and put people and in fact it ruined the housing market because the interest rates were high to get around the oil embargo that made the price of everything over the top. But his cut in taxes didn't help that at all. So anyway, we were in a near crash in '86, and he left office. But that comment, "Government's the problem, not the solution," stuck. And that became the mantra of the Republican Party. Get rid of government. It's when you have a problem, get rid of it. It's like a cancer, get rid of it. It's a swamp, get rid of it. Everybody's crooked. Everybody's crooked. Get rid of government. Defund it. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. People went nuts when they talked about defunding the cops who were killing people. That's okay, but don't defund. Don't defund my Social Security. Don't defund my Medicare. Don't defund, which is what the Republicans have been doing and want to do. They don't believe in government. And Gingrich followed Reagan, and that defund the government, it's a problem, get rid of it, has been going on ever since, from 1980 to the present. So all that Mr. Trump did is copy Reagan tenfold, cut taxes to no benefit of anybody but a few wealthy corporations who didn't hire any more people. And then people think that the stocks being bought and sold back and forth were an indication of an economy. It's a false economy, folks. The stock market doesn't mean the economy is going unless everybody's working. And we had the false equivalency of, well, it's lower interest, lower unemployment than before. People gave up. They weren't reporting to the people who would keep records of who's working and who isn't. But it wasn't really a choice between Obama and Trump as to how good they were, because actually, from after the crash of '06, which took 4 years to somewhat even out for Obama, he didn't raise the taxes back up to fund the government. The Republican Party blocked that. They want the government to fail. They don't want the government to succeed. They don't want to build the infrastructure because it's going to benefit people who work, who will be proud of working for their country and rebuilding the country. They don't believe in, the Republican Party has come to believe in government's a problem and get rid of it. And however you do it and whoever the leader is, we don't care. They really don't care if the president is DeSantis or Trump or the moon or Rick Scott or someone like that. You just plug in somebody and call them the leader. Forget about government. Of the people, by the people, for the people. Abraham Lincoln, a truly great man. And his party that he created is deteriorated into a monstrosity. I believe we're headed into little civil wars in the different states, trying to stop the voting, prevent the loss of seats in the local legislatures and in the general voting process, block it and prevent it from happening. The Republican Party today cannot win unless they can prevent the popular vote from happening. All of this happened largely because of a lack of faith in the voting system called the Electoral College. It's always been hanging out there as a mistake. That was done in 1787 to 1790. And the North and the South agreed that you had to have slaves to count for vote, but only 3/5 of a person per slave. So the South got 40% more of the vote to cover for the fact that they owned slaves. Those people couldn't vote, but they were counted so that they could have electors to decide on the vote. The electors are the ones who do the voting for each federal election. You don't, they do. The popular vote is set aside in behalf of the electors. So we've inherited that monstrosity. So now today, we've had this history of elections being in question all this time. And now someone comes along and says, government's a problem, get rid of it. Ronald Reagan, head of the Republican Party. And now we get it, the storm is at hand. The ruination of a Republican Party is at hand. And a big part of our country is in ruination as a result. And if the people don't believe in an electoral system and disregard it, and with the Electoral College, it's hard to argue for the existing system. So we're in for a revolution and, or I believe, a possible civil war. And it'll show up in the various precincts when different states like Florida will shut down polling places to block the vote. Same thing in Texas, same thing in North Carolina and Georgia. All these different swing states, as they're called, will end up being places where there'll be fights over voting rights. People will be driven away from the polls, and we're going to see this wholesale. That's a prediction. We're going to see these things, these fights happen. What happened in the attack on the Capitol, our federal Capitol, is going to happen at polling places, at the voting place where people want to vote. This is going to happen. That's a prediction. It's a very dire prediction, and it's going to make a lot of problems. And I think blood will be shed as a result. I'm sorry to do this story, folks, but I think we're headed into. It's not about whose side you're on. It's about who's going to lose. Is this country going to survive? Does it matter if it survives? If it doesn't survive in a democratic way, there's no stock market to worry about. It's done. It dies too. The faith in corporations, in operating in business, is showing up in Atlanta, Georgia. Delta Airlines pulled out because of the shenanigans of the state legislature, and other businesses are pulling out of states where the states are acting like they want to stop the vote. This is not a good time, folks. It's a worrisome time if you believe in government. Then again, you have to know what government is: of the people, protect you, the poor, the elderly, the helpless, the sick, the people in jails. All these people are vulnerable, at the mercy of the system or the lack of a system. How do we make this better? We probably have to have a constitutional convention and move toward, I think, a parliamentary system, which is another matter how we do that. But it would be much better than have party systems decide everything. You'll have coalitions, but parties, to me, are a bigger problem. Anyway, that's another story down the road. I want to thank you for tolerating this very sad outlook that I have, if you even care about what I think. Let us know what you think. What's wrong with what I said? Just remember, 45 years of a wealth tax built what we call modern America. It's just falling apart now, which is what Mr. Biden is wanting to rebuild based on what was done before, between 1935 and 1980. That's 45 years of taxes between 75% and 90% on the very wealthy. And they didn't complain a bit. You wouldn't hear that from them. They felt like they were true Americans supporting the growth of a good country, a great country. Thank you very much. See you then.